This is Fullerville, stage 14, first pass. This is 4.49 miles. Thank you.
Could you hold that off to the side so my co-driver can see it?
You want me to go to the other side?
No, from there, but just not in front of my face. That's perfect. Okay. Thanks.
30 seconds. We are armed and dangerous. $15. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go! Right 5 minus over Smoke Crest into left 5 over Crest 70. Right 5, 30. Smoke Crest 50. Left 5 minus into right 5. Left 6. Caution, Smoke Crest into right 4 is short, into turn left 3 plus Deceptive. Opens long, tightens 5 over Crest, 50. Left 5 plus over Crest, 30, right 3 plus. Oh, here's your left 5 plus over Crest, 30, right 3 plus. Into left 5 plus, 50. Right 5, 30. Smoke Crest into left 4 plus, no cut. Into right 5 minus. Left 6, very long. Kicks 180. Left 6 plus over Smoke Jump 30. Right 5 plus 100.
Sorry.
That's okay. Right 5 plus 100. Left 5 minus opens over Smoke Crest 70. Stay left over Smoke Crest 100. Left 6 tightens into right 4 plus over Crest 30. Here's your left 6 tightens into right 4 plus over Crest 30. Right 5 no cut 30. Caution left 3 over Smoke Jump tightens. Repeat, caution left 3 over Smoke Jump tightens 70. Right 4 plus long, opens long, 120. Right 6. Left 6 over Smoke Crest into right 6 plus, no cut. Here's your left 6 over Smoke Crest into right 6 plus, no cut. Into left 6, 70. Right 5 minus over Smoke Crest into left 5, 120. Right 5, 30. Left 5 plus opens, long over Crest, go, 50. Right 6 plus, over Smoke Crest, long over Smoke Crest. Into right 5 over Crest, go, 150. Go, go, go. Left 6 plus, 100. Smoke Crest, 600, don't left. Flat Smoke Crest, 600. Left 5 loose, long, 100. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Foot down, foot down.
Shut up.
Repeat, left 5 loose, long, 100. Caution brake, left 3 plus, tightens loose, 30. Right 4 plus, loose, 30. Right 5 plus, long, loose, go. Right 5 plus, long, loose, go. Into left 6 plus, over crest, go, 30. Left 6 plus, long, go. Into left 5, go. Right 6 long, over long crest, go, 250. Chicane left entry. Go. It's Anders. 600 over double Smolten crest. Then brake, Smolten crest into left 4 minus. Up there. There you go. Brake, Smolten crest, and left 4 minus, 50. Right 5, 150. Right 6, into finish, 50. Right 6 over Smolten crest, 100. You're done. Good job.
Yeah. Good job. Whoosh. I always say whoosh at the end of the...
Whoosh.
Whoosh, whoosh. Whoosh.
Push. That's a bit different. Hey, doing well.